The fluorescent lights of the supermarket hummed with a sound that made Eleanor's headache worse. At 82 years old, the simple act of grocery shopping had become a mountain to climb. She leaned heavily on the shopping cart, her knuckles turning white as she tried to steady her trembling legs. Her winter coat was thin, worn down by 20 years of use, and it did little to stop the shivering that started in her bones. Inside her cart sat only 3 items: a loaf of the cheapest white bread, a small carton of eggs, and a can of wet cat food. The cat food was for Barnaby, an old orange tabby cat who was the only living creature she spoke to most days. Eleanor approached the checkout line, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew this moment was coming, the moment of truth where she would find out if she had enough. She clutched her small, worn coin purse tighter, feeling the few coins inside rub against each other. The cashier, a young woman snapping gum, scanned the 3 items without making eye contact. "That will be $5.40, the cashier said, looking at her fingernails. Eleanor swallowed hard. $5.40. Yesterday, she had counted $4.50 on her kitchen table. She had hoped, prayed really, that there was a sale she didn't know about. Her wrinkled hands fumbled with the purse clasp, her fingers stiff from the cold outside. She poured the coins onto the small metal shelf at the register. Quarters, dimes, nickels, and a lot of pennies spilled out with a loud clatter. The person behind her in line sighed loudly, a sound of pure impatience. Eleanor felt heat rush to her cheeks. The shame burned hotter than any fire. She began to count, her voice a weak whisper. 1, 2, 3. She got to $4.50. She looked up at the cashier, her eyes pleading behind her thick glasses. I seem to be a little short today, dear, Eleanor said softly. The cashier popped her gum again. You have to put something back. Eleanor looked at the 3 items. The bread was her breakfast and lunch for the week. The eggs were her dinner for the week. The cat food was for Barnaby. Without hesitation, Eleanor reached for the eggs. I will put these back, she said, her voice trembling. A tear escaped and traced a path through the deep lines of her cheek. She needed those eggs. She was losing weight too fast, her doctor had said. But Barnaby needed to eat. He relied on her, and she would starve before she let him go hungry. The cashier voided the eggs and took the remaining money. Eleanor took her small plastic bag with the bread and cat food and began the slow walk to the exit. She felt small, invisible, and utterly forgotten by the world. She stepped out into the biting winter wind, which whipped around her frail body. The walk to her small house was only 4 blocks, but today it felt like miles. She didn't notice the tall man in the work jacket who had been standing behind her in line. His name was Mike, a construction worker with rough hands and a soft heart. He had seen her put back the eggs. He had seen the tear fall. It reminded him of his own grandmother, who had passed away the year before. A deep sadness washed over him, followed by a strong urge to act. He quickly paid for his own things and added a carton of eggs to his order. He rushed outside, scanning the parking lot for the small, hunched figure in the thin coat. He saw her turning the corner onto a side street and followed at a distance, not wanting to scare her. Eleanor reached her small house. It was dark. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the door. As she stepped inside, she didn't feel relief. The air inside the house was almost as cold as the air outside. She hadn't been able to afford oil for the furnace in 2 weeks. She could see her breath in the air in her own living room. Barnaby greeted her with a weak meow, rubbing against her cold ankles. I know, my love. I am here, she whispered to the cat. She kept her coat on and walked to the kitchen to open the can of food. Just as the can opener clicked, there was a firm knock on her front door. Eleanor froze. No one ever visited. She walked slowly to the door and peeked through the cracked glass. It was the tall man from the store. She opened the door an inch, leaving the security chain on. Yes? Ma'am, you dropped these at the store. Mike lied gently, holding up the carton of eggs. Eleanor looked confused. No, I put them back. I couldn't pay. I think you dropped them, Mike repeated, smiling kindly, and I picked them up for you. Eleanor unlocked the chain, her eyes wide with disbelief. As Mike stepped in to hand her the eggs, the freezing air of the house hit him like a wall. It was colder inside than it was out on the porch. Ma'am, is your heat working? He asked, frowning. Eleanor looked down at her shoes. I am waiting for a delivery, she lied, too proud to admit the truth. Mike knew it was a lie. He saw the pile of unopened bills on the small table by the door. He looked at this woman, who was freezing in her own home, willing to starve to feed her cat. He couldn't leave her like this. He handed her the eggs and then reached into his pocket for his phone. Do you mind if I make a quick call? He asked. Eleanor nodded mutely, clutching the eggs to her chest like treasure. Mike called his brother, who worked for a local oil delivery company. I need an emergency fill, Mike said into the phone. Yes, right now. I am paying for it. He hung up and looked at Eleanor. Help is on the way. Eleanor started to cry, real deep sobs that shook her small frame. Why? She gasped. Why are you doing this? Mike gently guided her to the worn-out couch and sat beside her, keeping his coat on. Because nobody should be cold, he said simply, and nobody should have to put back food. An hour later, the roar of the furnace kicking on was the most beautiful sound Eleanor had ever heard. Slowly, warmth began to fill the small house, chasing away the biting chill. Mike stayed until the house was warm. He even made her a scrambled egg sandwich. As he stood to leave, Eleanor grabbed his large, rough hand with both of her fragile ones. You are an angel, she whispered. Mike smiled, his eyes misty. No, ma'am, I'm just a neighbor. He promised to check on her every week, and for the first time in years, Eleanor believed someone would return. That night, she and Barnaby slept warmly, their bellies full. The cold winter no longer felt so lonely, because a stranger had brought the warmth of humanity back into her life.